Hi, I'm Veronica, and welcome back to the Reading Chronicles. Here are 6 authors I want to read more. I know I recently read The Death of Vivek Oji, but Akwaeke Emezi has 8 other novels with one more scheduled to come out this year, and I'm woefully behind. I was first introduced to Emezi when I read Freshwater to complete one of the tasks on Book Riot's Read Harder Challenge in 2019. It was like nothing I had ever read before, and I often feel ill-equipped to talk about it because it's so far outside the realm of my own experience. But perhaps that's why I loved it so much. It exposed me to a world and a state of being that is so far from my own, and I could do nothing but sit back and absorb it through the story on the pages. I didn't know much about Freshwater going into it. I had heard about it a little bit on Book Riot's podcast, and I think that ignorance of what the story was made it that much more affecting for me, so I'll try not to reveal too much of its contents as I talk about it. Freshwater centers on Ada, a Nigerian girl born with one foot on the other side. Unlike with many other children, something went amiss during Ada's birth. Emezi writes, "When the transition is made from spirit to flesh, the gates are meant to be closed. It's a kindness. It would be cruel not to. Perhaps during her birth, the gods forgot. They can be absent-minded like that." Because these gates were left open, Ada is not fully human. Instead of just being her, she is a we, conscious of the gods that inhabit her body. The problem is that humans are weak while the gods are able to endure tougher situations than their human vessels, and it's clear that Ada is going to go mad. In many ways, this is the story of Ada's madness, of her life as an Obanje, the trickster god in her human vessel. But in many other ways, it is about the very real problems of mental illness, gender identity, and our inability to fully understand either that transcend culture, religion, and time. Part of what makes this story so different is that it's narrated by some of the gods that inhabit Ada's body. Much of the story is told by the god that is only referred to as we, a sort of collective of gods that see the world through the eyes of the person they call the Ada. Other parts of the story are narrated by a god referred to as Asugara, a god that appears at a moment of trauma that affects Ada for the rest of her life. Asugara promises to protect Ada from the ordeal she will have to face in life, and in doing so acts as sort of a mask behind which Ada can hide while engaging in numerous types of destructive behavior. Ada herself narrates some parts of the story, but perhaps as a reflection of her own being, her voice seldom appears at the forefront. It's clear that much of the story is influenced by Emezi's own life. It has a closeness and an awareness that only someone with a complete understanding of this sort of life can express. The horror of traumatic events, the struggles to cope with the transgressions of one's own being, the certainty that one does not fit into neatly delineated categories is laid bare, never apologized for, nor portrayed in a way that is patronizing to the reader. Much like the decision to forego putting the Igbo words in italics, which is often done for words that are in a foreign language, Everything is presented in a way that asserts a sense of connection and belonging. Emezi does not segregate these ideas for American readers, nor for cisgender readers, nor for those who do not experience mental illness, because this story doesn't need to reflect them. I loved Emezi's decisions to rely on the reader's intelligence and ability to learn about something with which they may be completely unfamiliar. This made for a far more engrossing and intimate story, one that does not falter before strict definitions. It is both Eastern and Western. It is about the self and the expectations of society. It's about the here, but also about the before and after, the tangible and the intangible. As I mentioned, I've also read The Death of Vivek Oji, which deals with similar themes of gender and identity, as well as Pet, Emezi's first young adult novel that not only deals with the aforementioned themes, but also presents the issue of child sexual abuse and the very real fact that it is often perpetrated by somebody who is known and close to and trusted by the victim. In this story, Pet is a monster come to life, but their purpose is to expose who the real monsters are. Among Emezi's other books are Dear Senturan, a Black spirit memoir about their own decisions regarding gender and body, their journey as a writer, and the relationships they've experienced. Emezi narrates this audiobook themselves, so this is probably one that I'll listen to and read at the same time. Pet's companion novel is Bitter, set in the same city of Lucille, where supposedly all of the monsters have been cast out. Bitter attends a special school where she can concentrate on her painting, but outside the school, the city is filled with protests against the injustices that plague the city, forcing Bitter to contemplate where she really belongs. I'm told
You made a fool of death with your beauty
is a romance, but if I'm ever going to like a romance, it'll be from Emezi's mind. The story focuses on Faye, who lost the love of her life 5 years ago and is starting to slip back into the world of dating with a whirlwind summer romance. The problem is the relationship may be sabotaged by her growing interest in the one person who is 100% off limits to her. The paranormal romance Son of the Morning is slated to be released in November of this year, and this is super outside of my comfort zone, but I'm willing to try anything Emezi graces our world with. Picture this. You're living in Chicago when a book about the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition comes out. It tells the intertwining stories of famed architect Daniel H. Burnham and his race to construct the buildings needed for the fair, and Dr. H. Holmes, who is believed to be the country's first serial killer and who used the fair to lure his victims to their doom. It seems like everyone is walking around carrying a copy of the book or singing its praises. You, the smug reader that you are, decide to read it, sure that it can't possibly be good given how popular it is. You want to be able to say exactly how everyone is wrong. Except they're not wrong, you are, and the book is fantastic. Erik Larson's nonfiction thriller, The Devil in the White City, was published in 2003, and I read it shortly thereafter because you could not walk around Chicago without being practically assaulted by it. This is to say, I don't really remember much of what happened in the book, except that somehow the sections about architecture were just as compelling and suspenseful as the sections about the serial killer. I knew that Larson could not possibly have known what was going through the minds of Holmes's victims or many of the other characters in the book. And he says as much in his notes and sources section at the end of the book, that he used what little information there was on Holmes gleaned from newspapers, Holmes's own memoir, and the 3 confessions that he made, although the latter 2 were mostly untrue. He also took liberties to recreate 2 of Holmes's murders, even though no one else was present when they occurred. I knew this while reading the book, and yet I didn't care because the writing was just that good. Of course, I've said before that this set off a trend of other nonfiction writers trying to capture his style, and that I found them lacking. What I don't know is if Larson's other books live up to this incredible precedent. This is mostly because I'm far more drawn to fiction than nonfiction, but I can't believe that I've let 20 years pass without making an attempt to read at least one of Larson's other books. His next book, Thunderstruck, also weaved together 2 stories, that of a murder and that of the invention of the wireless telegraph. In the Garden of the Beast tells of the career of the American ambassador to Germany during the years of 1933 to 1937, during which he and his family are witness to the rise of the Third Reich. The Splendid and the Vile centers on the same war, but this time on Winston Churchill's first year as Prime Minister. His latest book, The Demon of Unrest, takes a look at the period just before the American Civil War, from the time when Lincoln was elected to the time when war broke out, and includes recountings from individuals on both sides. Maybe part of why I haven't picked up one of his other 8 books is that these topics don't necessarily interest me. I'm not a huge fan of reading about war, but I am interested in diving back into Larson's style that turns what could otherwise be a boring history lesson into an exciting thriller. Maybe The Devil in the White City was just a flash in the pan for me. After all, I lived in Hyde Park. I crossed the Midway where the fair was set almost every day during college. The Museum of Science and Industry, the only surviving building from the fair, is my favorite building in the city. I had a pretty personal connection to it and the area where the events were carried out. But I have a suspicion that it's more than that. If nothing else, reading The Devil in the White City taught me that while a book's popularity doesn't necessarily mean it's good, it also doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. The movie has been in talks for years, and while I was originally intrigued by the idea of Leonardo DiCaprio playing serial killer H.H. Holmes, I'm kind of off of him and am not particularly interested in seeing anything he's involved in anymore. I will go see the movie if it ever comes out, but I just hope he's not in it. Louise Erdrich is an author I'd been wanting to read for quite a while, and I finally read The Roundhouse to complete another task on Book Riot's Read Harder Challenge in 2020. This one was read a book in any genre by a Native, First Nations, or Indigenous author. She's received both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award and has been awarded the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction, just to name a few of the many honors she's had bestowed upon her. Native American writers are way under my radar, and I think that's a shame. I can just think of 2 others I've read, Sherman Alexie, who we won't talk about too much, and Stephen Graham Jones, who I don't quite understand why his books get the love they do, but perhaps that's just a difference of taste. But after reading The Roundhouse, I understand exactly why Erdrich is hailed as a brilliant writer, one whose books heavily feature Native American characters and settings. The Roundhouse focuses on 13-year-old Joe and his family on the day that his mother, Geraldine, doesn't show up at home at the expected time. Joe and his father quickly climb into their car to search for her, and they're relieved when they see her driving past them on the way to their home. However, when they return, they realize that something is horribly wrong. Frozen in the car, covered in vomit and blood and reeking of gasoline, they hurry her to the hospital. While waiting, Joe overhears a woman at the hospital saying that his mother had to have experienced one of two things. The first, a miscarriage he knows to be impossible because his mother was no longer able to get pregnant after his birth. That just leaves the second thing, a rape. This is a hard-hitting, fast-paced novel that addresses the violence and injustices perpetrated against the Native American community head-on. The entire story hinges on the fact of Geraldine's rape, not simply as a horrific act of violence to her, but as a legal matter that has no clear direction. After Geraldine is seen by doctors, Joe's father, Basil, insists that a state trooper, a local officer from their town of Hoopdance, and an officer from the tribal police each come to question her about the circumstances of the crime. As a judge in their community, Basil knows that the unconfirmed location of the rape, whether on state or tribal land, and the unknown racial identity of the rapist, whether Native American or not, play a significant role in how the crime will be pursued. Through this, Erdrich offers the readers a first-row seat to the oppressions Native American peoples have faced throughout the history of this country we know as America. I later read Future Home of the Living God for another task in Book Riot's Read Harder Challenge in 2021, this time to read a story set in the Midwest. This book is a bit more on the sci-fi side. In a bizarre twist of history, evolution is starting to move backwards. We don't know why this is happening, nor do the characters. All we know is that plants have started growing wilder and leafier, animals resembling their ancestral forebears hunt the land, and women have started giving birth to pre-Homo sapien babies. The result of this is that pregnant women are put on high watch, required to voluntarily turn themselves in to be monitored until they give birth or be turned in against their wills. Congress has called a state of emergency, and there are rumors that the de-evolution developments could be the result of a new virus, which was truly harrowing to read in 2021. Cedar Hawk Songmaker, our protagonist, is 4 months pregnant, and the book is the letter she writes to the unborn child as she struggles to stay alive. The story is also about Cedar working to find her roots. Cedar is Ojibwe, like Erdrich, and as a child, she was adopted by white Minneapolis liberals. How she was adopted is still a bit of a question, as the Indian Child Welfare Act prohibits the adoption of Native American children into a non-Native family. Her adoptive parents, Glenn and Sarah, have never quite answered this for her, but they have celebrated her ethnicity in any way possible, although it's clear to Cedar that she was made into something of a token, who perhaps made her parents feel more special. At the beginning of the novel, Cedar has received a letter from her biological mother, with whom she shares the birth name of Mary Potts. Through meeting her and her other family members, Cedar will have her imaginings of the traditional Native American family burst, but will also discover who she is as she attempts to evade the law. Erdrich has written 17 other novels, plus poetry, a short story collection, and 4 books of nonfiction. I will say that I did read her debut novel of Love Medicine, and I didn't really like it, But I was also entering what would be a reading slump that lasted a few years, so perhaps that accounted for my response to it. I'm contemplating making Erdrich my next year of author. 17 novels is a lot, but I feel like it'll be worth it. My introduction to reading Percival Everett was when I found out that American fiction was based on a book, and I raced to finish it before the movie went out of the theaters. I was blown away. The book Erasure focuses on English professor Thelonious Monk Ellison, writer of highly academic and highly dry literature, which we're given a snippet of, and of which I can only describe as so University of Chicago. If you know, you know. Frustrated by his lack of sales, of being told that his writing isn't black enough, by his financial struggles and worries about his mother's declining health, and by the success of the new smash hit We's Lives in the Ghetto, which plays on all of the black stereotypes, he sits down and pens his own shuck and jive tale of Van Gogh Jenkins, who is every stereotype about black men to have ever existed. Erasure is a novel within a novel. We get the entirety of Monk's novel, originally called My Pathology and later changed to Just Fuck. And it is a tough read. I recently listened to a podcast about the book, and the podcaster was saying that they didn't like the inner novel because it's just Van Gogh doing one bad thing after another. But that's the point. I don't think we're supposed to like it. I think we're supposed to feel uncomfortable, particularly when we think about the type of content that we consume that is exactly like this. I was especially uncomfy because it was abundantly clear that My Pathology borrowed heavily from Richard Wright's Native Son, which is a book that I would consider among my top 10 favorites, and now I don't know what to do about that. Should I not like Native Son? Was it actually harmful in telling the story of an uneducated black man who is persecuted for the crime he accidentally commits? Percival, I need answers. What I thought was brilliant about Erasure was that it portrayed two very different sides of the black experience. While Monk is being shoved into this corner of ghettoization, of being black enough, his life as a black man is not so different from any other. His worries are about his career and his family, ones that so many people can identify with. This led me to telling one of my friends that he needed to read the book and then see the movie so we could discuss it properly. This happened to coincide with me going to visit him, and we ended up watching the movie together and subsequently having an uncontrollable laughing fit on public transportation because we said we were going to write the Urban Odyssey featuring Odysseus and his quest to get back from the north side of Chicago to the south side and see his baby mama again. Trust me, it was hilarious and highly offensive. I've since read James Everett's retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the enslaved Jim's point of view and thought it was a straight masterpiece. And I read The Trees about a series of murders that occur and at whose sites a body that bears a striking resemblance to that of Emmett Till's appears. Everett has been nominated for and received a whole slew of awards, and my main question is, why hadn't I heard of him until 2023? The man has 24 novels, not to mention short stories and poetry. Why were we sleeping on him? Or maybe I was just sleeping on him, but I am fully awake now and on a quest to get more of his words into my brain. José Saramago represents something of an achievement for me. At a point when I decided to restart my Spanish studies, I decided to read some books in Spanish. and listened to the audio, and I chose Blindness, or Ensayo sobre la ceguera. Originally written in Portuguese, I figured that if I had to read a translation anyway, I might as well read it in Spanish, especially given that Spanish and Portuguese are much closer to each other than English and Portuguese are. Well, that turned out to be a huge mistake because Saramago's style was like nothing I had seen before. His long, winding sentences without quotation marks to indicate when somebody starts speaking and when they stop speaking, without punctuation to indicate a change in ideas, was a great challenge for me. The audio didn't help me either because it required that I continue to move forward without having the time to stop and think about what I had just read. I abandoned the task then, but I later gave the book another try, and I'm so glad I did because I ended up falling in love with his style and this story of a society in the middle of a plague of sudden and inexplicable blindness. The country in which this story happens is never named, and it doesn't really matter because what Saramago is talking about here is the breakdown of humanity in the face of the loss of social order. It could be Portugal, or it could be the United States. In the middle of the day, in the middle of the street, in front of a red traffic light, a driver loses his sight. From this point forward, he sees everything as white. His blindness doesn't waste much time in extending itself to the person who helps him, and from that point, to others. The government tries to delay the spreading of this blindness by collecting all of the blind people and quarantining them in a sanatorium guided by the army. This is the beginning of the end. Although the first blind people attempt to maintain some sense of civilized life, the increase in quarantined people results in a sort of disintegration into a baser, more animalistic, and more predatory life. We're witnesses to this rupture of humanity and society. However, there is one other person who also stands as witness to this madness. One woman who continues to see. It was quite interesting that Saramago chose not to give his characters names. They're only known for their relationships with others. The first man who falls blind is known as the first blind man. The ophthalmologist who the first blind man visits in a panic is known as the doctor. His wife is known as the doctor's wife. These three, along with the old man with the black eye patch, the girl with the dark glasses, and the cross-eyed boy, become the story's principal characters. In this way, Saramago maintains a sense of blindness for his readers and gives strength to the idea that in reality, we're no more than the way we treat others. I later read the book's sequel, Seeing, or Ensayo sobre la lucidez, which is about another unnamed city in which 83% of the votes cast on election day are blank, and the government has to figure out what to do about this. This was particularly interesting to read at the end of 2020. I've also read The Double, or El Hombre Duplicado, about a man who watches a movie and realizes that one of the actors looks exactly like him. And I've also read The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, or El Evangelio según Jesucristo, about the period of Jesus' life not covered in the Bible. Saramago, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1998, is the author of 20 novels, so I've just barely begun to make a dent in his bibliography. He is supremely difficult to read, especially in another language, but I've rarely felt so rewarded for having persevered through the pages of a book. With just 5 novels and a book of essays, Mohsin Hamid has the shortest bibliography on my list, but I still can't believe I've only read one of them. In Exit West, young lovers Saeed and Nadia prepare to embark on a journey from their war-ravaged home in an unnamed country to an unknown land, leaving behind those whom they love and clinging to each other in an effort for survival. All across their city, mysterious doors are popping up, allowing citizens to step through, Narnia-like, into another land. Walking through one of these doors will be the hardest but most necessary decision they will have to make. In some parts speculative fiction and in some parts a love story, Exit West derives its strength from its descriptive passages of being forced from one's home and being made to eke out a living in a strange land. Nadia and Saeed are not your typical star-crossed lovers, destined to find their happily ever after. They're simply two people with some attraction to each other. Nadia has her motorcycle and the black robe that she wears, less for religious reasons and more so men won't bother her. And Saeed has his regular prayer rituals and his insistence that the two not have sex until they marry. They are simply pushed ever closer by the outside forces of war. They care for each other, but that feeling is clearly intensified by the fact that they find themselves surrounded by so many strangers. As the couple travels through the doors to Greece and England and later the US, they are forced to consider what belonging truly is and what it means to belong to a group where everyone was foreign, and so, in a sense, no one was. Reminiscent of Colson Whitehead's reimagining of a literal underground railroad to transport enslaved people from one horrifying station to the next horrifying station, Hamid's mystical doors are used as a plot device. Specific attention is not given to what the doors truly are or what happens when one enters them, because the doors represent opportunity and the chance to start over. They also allow Hamid to make some poignant observations about the dichotomy between the immigrant and the native. It is perhaps unsurprising that the people who live at the exit end of the doors take issue with the influx of people spilling out of them, and Hamid's decision to have them claim some sort of native status and therefore some level of superiority over the travelers is a thinly veiled commentary on what truly happens during times of war and migration, this go back to where you came from attitude that is pervasive in the US. I know some may take issue with Hamid's style, but I found his writing beautiful. He has these excessively long sentences that convey a sense of urgency and the feeling that these events are happening one after the other with no chance to capture one's breath in between. I guess this isn't surprising given my aforementioned love of José Saramago. Hamid's latest novel, The Last White Man, was published in 2022 and explores similar themes of race, belonging, and society. Why haven't I read it? This is the problem with loving books. There is so much great literature out there that you're always lagging behind. Have you read any of these authors or these books? Also, who do you wish you read more? Let me know in the comments. That's all from me today. I hope you read well.